The HFY War fleet emerged from hyperspace at the edge of the solar system, with all the drama and spectacle that 300 years of galactic conquest had taught them. 17 massive warships, each one larger than most planetary defense stations, arranged themselves in perfect formation around their flagship. The flagship itself was a monument to imperial power, stretching nearly 3 miles from bow to stern. Its hull covered in the battle honors of 43 conquered species. Every light on every ship blazed at full power, creating a display that had brought entire civilizations to their knees before a single shot was fired. On the bridge of the flagship, Ambassador Vexter stood before the communications array and adjusted his ceremonial robes. He had delivered the declaration of war to 16 species before this one, and each time the response had been immediate and satisfying. Some species begged for mercy. Others scrambled their fleets in a desperate show of defiance. A few simply surrendered on the spot. All of them understood the weight of the moment when the HFY Empire came calling. He activated the broadcast system, sending his message across every frequency that humanity used. His voice boomed with the authority of countless victories. People of Earth, hear now the words of the HFY Empire. You have violated the sacred laws of galactic order by expanding your colonies beyond the boundaries set by the Imperial Council. You have refused to acknowledge the sovereignty of the Emperor. You have shown disrespect to the emissaries of superior civilizations. For these crimes, the HFY Empire hereby declares war upon humanity. You have 3 solar cycles to prepare your surrender. Resistance will be met with total destruction. Your worlds will burn. Your species will serve. This is the fate of all who defy the Empire. The message repeated in 17 different languages, each translation carefully crafted to maximize fear and demonstrate the Empire's thorough research. Vexter allowed himself a small smile as he ended the broadcast. Another species about to learn their place in the galactic order. He settled into his chair and waited for the panicked response that always came within minutes. On Earth. In a small office in the United Nations Space Command headquarters in Geneva, Commander Jake Morrison was eating a sandwich when the message came through. He had drawn the short straw that day and was stuck monitoring the deep space communication channels, a job that usually involved nothing more interesting than routing cargo, ship messages, and listening to automated weather reports from the outer colonies. The declaration of war interrupted his lunch with a series of urgent beeps from his console. Jake set down his sandwich and pulled up the message. He listened to the whole thing while chewing, his expression never changing from mild boredom. When it finished, he read through the text version to make sure he had not missed anything important. Then he checked the source coordinates, noted the ship's signatures, and pulled up the standard response protocols for unsolicited military communications. According to the manual, declarations of war from unknown parties were supposed to be forwarded to his commanding officer with a priority flag. Jake typed up a quick summary, attached the original message, and sent it to Admiral Ben Crawford with a subject line that read, "Aliens declare war. Require response." Then he went back to his sandwich. He had a meeting about supply requisitions in 20 minutes and still needed to finish the paperwork from yesterday's cargo. Inspection. Admiral Crawford was 3 hours into a budget meeting when Jake's message arrived. The meeting had started badly and gotten worse. The Civilian Oversight Committee wanted to cut funding for the Mars colony expansion, arguing that the money would be better spent on Earth's infrastructure. Crawford had been trying to explain for the past 45 minutes that humanity needed the colony expansion to maintain its mining operations, which in turn funded the Earth infrastructure they were so concerned about. Nobody was listening. His tablet beeped with Jake's message. Crawford glanced at it during a particularly boring presentation about cost overruns. He read the summary, raised his eyebrows slightly, and opened the full message. He listened to about 30 seconds of Vexter's declaration before closing it and marking it as low priority. Another alien empire making demands? They got at least 2 of these every year from various groups who thought humans should pay taxes to galactic councils that humanity had never joined. Crawford made a mental note to have the diplomacy team draft a standard rejection letter and went back to arguing about the Mars budget. The committee chair was now suggesting that they delay the colony ships by 6 months to save money. Crawford rubbed his temples and wondered if he could retire early. By the time the evening news cycle started, the declaration of war had made its way through various government channels and been leaked to the press. The major networks considered it briefly, but decided that the story lacked visual interest. One producer pointed out that they had no footage of the alien fleet, no human response to show, and no immediate threat to report. The story got bumped in favor of a piece about a new commercial, spacecraft design, and an interview with a scientist who claimed to have found evidence of ancient microbial life on Europa. The New York Times ran a small article on page 7 under the headline, "Alien Empire Declares War. Stock Markets Unaffected." The article was 3 paragraphs long and included a quote from a government spokesman saying that the situation was being monitored. The spokesman's name was not considered important enough to include. Most readers skipped past it entirely, more interested in the sports section and a developing story about a celebrity divorce on social media. The declaration got slightly more attention. A few thousand people shared the news with jokes about alien invasions and movie references. Someone created a meme showing Wexler's face with the caption, "When you declare war, but nobody cares." Got 40,000 likes before disappearing into the endless scroll of content. By the next morning, most people had forgotten about it entirely, out near Pluto. War Master Colvin waited aboard his command ship for humanity's response. 6 hours had passed since the declaration, far longer than any species had ever taken to reply. He had expected panic broadcasts by now, or at least frantic diplomatic messages begging for negotiation. Instead, his communications officer reported complete silence from Earth. Colvin began to wonder if the message had been received properly. He ordered a second broadcast, this time adding visual elements showing the might of the Zalthari fleet. Surely the sight of their warships would provoke some reaction. The message was sent, and again they waited. 2 hours later, a response finally came through. It was a text message, not even a video communication. The message was brief and confusing. Message received. Please fill out Form 2847B for military engagement, requests, and submit to the Bureau of Interstellar Relations. Current processing time is 4 to 6 weeks. Thank you for your patience. Colvin read the message 3 times. Then he had his communications officer verify that it was authentic and not some kind of automated error. The officer confirmed that the message had come directly from Earth's military command structure. Colvin felt something he rarely experienced in his long military career. He felt confused. War Master Colvin had not achieved his rank by being patient, and the bureaucratic response from Earth had pushed him past the point of diplomatic courtesy. He ordered his fleet to advance toward Mars, expecting that a show of force closer to human territory would finally trigger the fear response that every other species had shown. The 17 warships moved in formation, their weapon systems powered up and ready, their shields at maximum strength. This was the moment when civilizations usually broke. When they saw the unstoppable power of the Empire bearing down on them and realized that resistance was futile, the fleet had barely crossed the orbit of Neptune when they encountered their first human vessel. It was small, roughly the size of a Zalthari shuttle, and appeared to be on a routine patrol route. The ship's designation was USSC Wanderer, and according to the minimal information painted on its hull, it was a survey and monitoring vessel. Colvin saw an opportunity to demonstrate imperial power and ordered his flagship to move into an intercept position. Captain Nicole Harper had been having a quiet day aboard the Wanderer when her sensor officer reported 17 large contacts approaching from the outer system. She pulled up the sensor data and whistled softly at the size of the ships. Definitely not human design, and definitely not registered with any of the civilian shipping companies. She checked the bulletin board to see if anyone had warned her about visiting alien fleets, but there was nothing recent except a notice about some empire declaring war that she had not bothered to read in detail. The lead ship was hailing her now, and Nicole accepted the communication link. The face that appeared on her screen was vaguely reptilian with dark scales and bright yellow eyes. The alien looked angry, which was not unusual in Nicole's experience. A lot of aliens seem to walk around angry about something. "Human vessel, you are ordered to stand down and prepare to be boarded," Colvin announced. Your species has been declared enemy of the Zalthari Empire. Surrender immediately or be destroyed. Nicole blinked and looked at her first officer, a young man named Tyler Brooks, who was drinking coffee and looking equally confused. "Did you read that war declaration thing that came through yesterday?" she asked him. Tyler shook his head. "Nah, I figured if it was important, someone would tell us." Nicole turned back to the screen, where Colvin was waiting for her terrified surrender. "Sorry, did you guys file the proper forms?" she asked. "We can't engage in military actions without authorization numbers. It's a whole thing with the paperwork." Colvin stared at her. This was not how conversations with enemies were supposed to go. "I am War Master Colvin of the Zalthari Imperial Fleet. I do not file forms. I conquer worlds." "Right, yeah, that sounds great," Nicole said, pulling up her contact list. "But I'm going to need to check with my supervisor before we do any conquering. Can you hold on for a bit?" Before Colvin could respond, Nicole muted the channel and called Lieutenant Commander Ryan Phillips back on Mars Station. The call went to voicemail. Nicole left a message explaining the situation and asked Ryan to call her back when he had a chance. Then she unmuted the channel with Colvin and gave him an apologetic smile. "My supervisor is at lunch right now," she said. "You're welcome to wait here, or we can schedule something for later this afternoon. I've got some coffee if you want some." Colvin felt his 3 hearts beating faster with frustration. "You do not schedule wars," he said through clenched teeth. "Wars happen. I am making war happen right now." Nicole looked uncertain. "I mean, I get that, but I literally cannot engage with you without the proper authorization codes. Last time someone fired weapons without authorization, they got suspended for 2 weeks. I've got bills to pay, so I'm not risking that for anybody." The War Master closed his eyes and tried to remember his training in dealing with primitive species. Perhaps this human simply did not understand the gravity of the situation. "If you do not surrender, I will destroy your ship," he said slowly and clearly. "Yeah, you could try that," Nicole agreed. "But then you definitely need to fill out the incident reports. And those are even worse than the engagement authorization forms. Trust me, you want to do this the right way." For the next 3 hours, Zalthari fleet sat in space while Nicole and her crew played cards and waited for Ryan Phillips to finish his lunch. Colvin spent the time alternating between rage and confusion. His subordinates kept asking him what they were waiting for, and he had no good answer. They were waiting because the human had asked them to wait. And somehow that had seemed reasonable at the time. When Ryan finally called back, he sounded annoyed. "Nicole, what's so urgent that you had to interrupt my meal?" Nicole explained the situation with the alien fleet and their declaration of war. Ryan sighed loudly and told her to put the alien commander on the line. Colvin found himself talking to another human who seemed even less impressed than the first one. "Look, I'm going to authorize Captain Harper to show you around our defensive perimeter," Ryan said. "You can take a look at what we've got out here, and then we can discuss this war thing later. But nobody is firing any weapons today. I don't have time to process the discharge reports." "I do not want a tour," Colvin said. "I want to conquer your species." Ryan rubbed his eyes. "Yeah, well, I want a vacation on the beaches of Titan, but we don't always get what we want. Take the tour, or go back to wherever you came from. Those are your options." The call ended before Colvin could respond. He looked at his senior officers, who all looked as confused as he felt. Finally, he decided that observing human defenses might actually be valuable intelligence. He ordered his ships to follow the MP Wanderer on whatever tour this infuriating human wanted to give. Nicole took them on a comprehensive tour of the Mars defensive grid. She pointed out the automated weapon platforms, the shield generators, the sensor arrays, and the patrol routes that other ships like hers followed on a daily basis. She explained the shift schedules, the maintenance procedures, and the communication protocols. She showed them the mining stations, the agricultural domes, and the cargo routes that connected everything together. Colvin absorbed all of this information with growing unease. The humans were showing him everything. They were not trying to hide their defensive capabilities or pretend to be stronger than they were. They were simply showing him exactly what they had, as if they had no fear that he might use this information against them. After 6 hours of touring, Colvin had seen enough. He demanded to speak with whoever was in charge of Earth's military forces. Nicole patched him through to Admiral Crawford, who was now in a different meeting about cafeteria renovations. The Admiral took the call on speakerphone. Colvin could hear multiple human voices arguing about whether to replace the salad bar. "Yeah, what is it?" Crawford asked, sounding distracted. Colvin drew himself up to his full height. "I am War Master Colvin of the Zalthari Empire. I have declared war on humanity. I demand your immediate surrender." There was a pause. Someone in Crawford's meeting said something about vegetarian options. Then Crawford spoke again. "Right, got your message yesterday. Look, we're pretty busy this month. Budget meetings, infrastructure projects, the usual stuff. How about you circle back in August? We should have some free time then." "August," Colvin repeated. "That is 4 months away." "Yeah, sorry about that," Crawford said. "We're just really booked up right now. Send an email to my assistant, and she'll find a spot on the calendar. Thanks for calling." The connection ended. Colvin stood on his bridge, surrounded by his officers, and tried to understand what had just happened. He had declared war on a species, advanced his fleet into their territory, and demanded their surrender. They had given him a tour and asked him to make an appointment. Colvin decided that the humans were either incredibly stupid or playing some kind of psychological game that he did not understand. Either way, he was done with diplomacy and bureaucracy and tours. He was a war master of the Zalthari Empire, and it was time to remind these humans what that meant. He ordered his fleet to proceed to Titan, where intelligence reports showed a small mining outpost with minimal defenses. A quick strike would demonstrate imperial power and finally provoke the fear response that every conquered species eventually showed. The Zalthari fleet approached Titan in full battle formation, weapons charged and ready. The mining station was exactly where the intelligence reports had indicated. A modest facility built into the icy surface with a few dome structures and communication arrays visible on the surface. It looked vulnerable and isolated. It's perfect for a demonstration of overwhelming force. Colvin opened a communication channel to the station. "Human outpost. This is War Master Colvin of the Zalthari Empire. You have 10 seconds to evacuate before we destroy your facility. This is your only warning." The response came from a woman who appeared on the screen wearing a mining company uniform and holding a coffee mug. Her name tag identified her as Amy Brooks, station manager. She looked at Colvin with the same mild confusion that every human seemed to show when meeting him. "Hey, yeah, we're not evacuating," Amy said. "We've got quotas to meet, and corporate gets really annoying when we fall behind schedule. Did you need something?" Colvin felt his patience finally snap. "I need you to fear me," he said. "I need you to understand that your species is about to be conquered. I need you to react like every other species in the galaxy." Amy took a sip of her coffee. "Look, I don't know what to tell you. We're just trying to mine ice and keep the reactors running. If you want to file a complaint about something, I can give you the corporate number." Colvin cut the communication and gave the order to fire. 3 of his warships opened up with their main plasma cannons, sending massive bolts of superheated energy toward the mining station. The shots were carefully calibrated to destroy the surface structures while leaving the underground portions intact, a standard intimidation technique that usually resulted in immediate surrender. The mining station's defensive shields activated automatically. Appearing as a shimmering blue dome over the facility, the plasma bolts hit the shields and dissipated harmlessly, their energy absorbed and redirected into the ground. Colvin stared at his tactical display in disbelief. The shields had not flickered or weakened. They had simply absorbed an attack that should have overwhelmed any civilian installation. Amy's face appeared on his screen again. She looked annoyed now. "Okay, you just fired on us," she said. "That's going to require an incident report, and those take forever to fill out. I'm going to need your full names, your ship registration numbers, and a detailed explanation of why you opened fire on a civilian mining facility." Colvin ignored her and ordered a full barrage from all ships in range. Dozens of plasma bolts, missile volleys, and energy beams converged on the mining station from 3 different directions. It was enough firepower to level a small city, and Colvin expected to see the shields collapse and the station torn apart. Instead, shields held and something else happened. Small hatches opened across the surface of the mining station, and a swarm of drones emerged. They were compact, roughly spherical, and moved with frightening speed. The swarm split into 3 groups and intercepted the Zalthari ships before they could react. The drones did not use weapons in the traditional sense. Instead, they attached themselves to the Zalthari warships and began disrupting their power systems. Within 2 minutes, 3 of Colvin's ships went dark, their reactors shut down, and their systems disabled. The ships were not destroyed, just completely neutralized. The drones then detached and returned to the mining station. Disappearing back into their launch bays, Amy appeared on the screen again, now looking genuinely irritated. "You guys just made me activate our defense grid," she said. "Do you know how much those drones cost to deploy? Corporate is going to take this out of my bonus. I'm sending you an invoice for the ammunition and drone maintenance. You can pay within 30 days, or we'll send it to collections." Colvin could not speak. His 3 disabled ships were drifting in space, their crews frantically trying to restart their reactors. The mining station sat undamaged, its shields still active, its daily operations apparently continuing as normal. A civilian facility had just disabled 3 Imperial warships without breaking stride. Back on Earth, the incident at Titan finally generated some actual news coverage. The evening broadcasts led with the story, showing grainy footage of the Zalthari attack and the drone response. Defense Secretary Greg Manning gave a press conference where he described the attack as regrettable and announced that humanity would file a formal protest with the Zalthari Empire. Through the proper diplomatic channels, a reporter asked if this meant Earth was going to war. Manning looked confused by the question. "We're already technically at war," he said. "They declared it last week. We're just responding through the appropriate mechanisms. Military action is obviously authorized for self-defense, as demonstrated by the mining station's response. Beyond that, we're taking a measured approach and consulting with our allies." Another reporter asked if the government was concerned about further attacks. Manning shrugged. "The Zalthari technology appears to be fairly outdated," he said. "Our automated defense systems handle the situation without any human intervention required. We're monitoring the situation, but there's no immediate threat to Earth or the colonies." The press conference ended after 15 minutes, and the news cycle moved on to other stories. The Titan incident got more coverage than the original declaration of war. But it still ended up being the 3rd story of the night. After a major political scandal and a heartwarming piece about a school that had raised money for a new playground, Colvin retreated to the outer system to regroup and request guidance from Emperor Zalthor himself. The Emperor listened to his report in silence, his expression unreadable. When Colvin finished explaining what had happened, the Emperor was quiet for a long moment. "You were telling me that a civilian mining facility defeated 3 of our warships?" the Emperor finally said. "They did not defeat them, my lord," Colvin said carefully. "They disabled them. The ships are still intact. The drones used some kind of electromagnetic pulse technology that shut down our reactors temporarily. And this mining facility did this automatically, without any apparent military support." "My lord," the Emperor leaned back in his throne. "What do our intelligence reports say about human military capabilities?" Colvin pulled up the data. "The reports are concerning, my lord. Human history shows constant warfare among their own factions. They have developed weapons capable of destroying entire planets, though they appear reluctant to use them. Their entertainment media frequently depicts scenarios of fighting off alien invasions. They teach their children military strategy through something called video games. So they are a warrior culture. It appears so, my lord, but they do not behave like one. They treat our declaration of war as a bureaucratic inconvenience. They show no fear, no anger, no pride. They simply continue their normal activities as if we are not here." The Emperor considered this. "Perhaps they are so powerful that they genuinely do not consider us a threat. Send scout ships to their colony worlds. Observe them carefully. Do not engage unless attacked. I want to understand what we are dealing with before we commit further resources." Colvin bowed and ended the communication. He gave orders for his scout ships to disperse throughout human space and observe their activities. Perhaps watching the humans in their daily lives would provide some insight into this baffling species. Over the next 2 weeks, the scouts sent back reports that only deepened the mystery. Human colonies were busy with mining, agriculture, construction, and trade. They went about their work with no apparent concern for the Zalthari fleet lurking at the edges of their system. Military ships passed by the scouts without engaging, their crews sometimes offering casual greetings over open channels. One human pilot had invited a scout ship captain to join a card game, apparently not caring that they were technically enemies. The daily routine of humanity continued, without pause, while the Zalthari Empire tried to figure out what to do next. Captain Dan Fletcher was 3 days into a cargo run from Earth to Europa when his long-range sensors picked up a Zalthari patrol near Jupiter. He groaned and checked his delivery schedule. He was already running 2 hours behind because of a delay at the loading dock, and he really could not afford another setback. The Zalthari patrol consisted of 2 medium-sized warships that moved to intercept his cargo hauler, a vessel called Blue Horizon. Don had been flying cargo routes for 8 years and had dealt with plenty of complications, from engine failures to customs inspections, to that one time when his entire shipment of vegetables had frozen because of a faulty heating unit. Alien warships were a new problem, but Dan approached it the same way he approached everything else in his job. With tired resignation, the lead Zalthari ship hailed him with the usual demands. Human cargo vessel. This is the Zalthari Imperial Patrol. You will stop your engines and prepare to be boarded. Resistance will result in your destruction. Dan reduced his speed and opened a channel. Yeah, hi, look, I've got a delivery deadline and I'm already behind schedule. If I'm late, I don't get paid, and I've got bills due next week. Can we maybe do this another time? The Zalthari commander, a junior officer named Victo, was prepared for many responses, but not for a request to reschedule. You do not understand your situation, human. Your species is at war with the Empire. We are authorized to search all human vessels for contraband and military supplies. Sure, I get that, Dan said, but I'm carrying frozen food supplies to Europa Station. There are about 3,000 people up there who are expecting their groceries. If I show up late, the station manager is going to dock my pay. And I've already been docked twice this month for things that were not even my fault. Victo considered simply destroying the cargo ship, but his orders were to gather intelligence, not to antagonize the humans unnecessarily. We will board your ship now. If you comply, the process will be quick. Dan sighed and brought his ship to a complete stop. Fine, but please make it fast. I've really got to keep moving. The Zalthari boarding party consisted of 12 soldiers in full combat armor, armed with plasma rifles and scanning equipment. They stormed aboard the Blue Horizon, expecting to find hidden weapons or military intelligence. Instead, they found cargo hold after cargo hold filled with frozen food. There were pallets of pizza, boxes of ice cream, crates of frozen vegetables, and containers of pre-made meals. It was the most boring cargo hold any of them had ever seen. Don followed them around, checking his watch every few minutes. You guys want some coffee? He offered. I've got a pot brewing in the galley. The soldiers ignored him and continued their search. They scanned every container, checked every storage locker, and examined the ship's computer systems. After an hour, they had found nothing except food and a personal collection of music files that Dan had apparently gathered over several years. Victo was frustrated. What is this music? He demanded, pointing at the computer display. Oh, that's just stuff I listen to on long flights, Dan said. Helps pass the time. You want me to play some? I've got a pretty good mix. Against his better judgment, Victo allowed Dan to play some of the music. For the next 30 minutes, while his soldiers finished their search, Victo listened to a variety of human musical styles. Some of it was pleasant. Some of it was confusing. All of it was completely irrelevant to the war effort. By the time the Zalthari boarding party left, Dan was 2 hours behind schedule. He filed a complaint with the Interstellar Commerce Commission as soon as the aliens were gone, citing unlawful delay of commercial vessel and requesting compensation for lost time. The complaint went through automated processing and generated a fine of 1,000 credits against the Zalthari Empire for violation of Dalcel. Commercial shipping regulations. Zalthari Empire had conquered 43 species over 3 centuries. They had destroyed fleets, occupied planets, and subjugated entire civilizations. They had never been fined for a regulatory violation. The invoice arrived at their diplomatic office 3 days later, and nobody knew what to do with it. Eventually, it was forwarded to Emperor Zelthar himself, who stared at it for several minutes in complete silence. Meanwhile, on Earth, engineer Kevin Torres was working on a defense satellite upgrade that had been in development for 3 years. The project was part of a routine modernization program that had nothing to do with the Zalthari threat. Kevin and his team were simply improving humanity's defensive grid because that was their job, and the old Satelli Tays were due for replacement. His supervisor, Lisa Chen, stopped by his workspace to check on progress. "How's the new grid coming along?" she asked. Kevin pulled up his project timeline. "We're on schedule for deployment in 6 months, same as always. The new satellites have better power, efficiency, and longer operational lifespans. Should reduce maintenance costs by about 30%. Lisa nodded and made a note on her tablet. "Should we accelerate the timeline because of the war?" Kevin thought about it and shook his head. "We're already over budget, and the current grid is working fine. The Zalthari haven't really done anything threatening yet. I think we can stick to the original schedule." "Fair enough," Lisa agreed. "Let me know if anything changes." At the Pentagon, military strategist Megan Price was presenting a comprehensive war plan to the Joint Chiefs of Staff. She had spent 2 weeks analyzing the Zalthari fleet composition, their tactics, their technology, and their strategic weaknesses. Her presentation included detailed battle scenarios, resource allocation plans, and projected casualty estimates. It was thorough, professional, and completely realistic. The admirals and generals listened politely and asked a few questions about logistics and timeline. When Megan finished, they thanked her for her excellent work and asked her to keep the plans updated in case they were needed. Then they returned to discussing a much more pressing issue, which was a trade dispute with the Centauri Alliance over shipping routes near the Kepler colonies. General Chris Bradley summarized the prevailing opinion when he said, "The Zalthari will probably lose interest and leave once they realize we're not going to give them the reaction they want. Most of these empire types are all about intimidation. When that doesn't work, they move on to easier targets." Admiral Crawford agreed. "Keep monitoring them, but I don't think we need to disrupt our normal operations. We've got bigger issues to deal with right now." The meeting moved on to budget discussions and personnel assignments. The Zalthari War, which had technically been ongoing for almost 3 months, was barely worth mentioning. It had become background noise, something that people were vaguely aware of but did not think about unless directly reminded. In space, Colvin received the intelligence reports from his scout ships and tried to make sense of them. The humans were not preparing for war. They were not mobilizing reserves or building emergency fortifications. They were going about their normal business, as if the Zalthari Empire did not exist. Mining operations continued on schedule. Colony ships departed for new worlds. Trade vessels moved freely between planets. Children attended schools where they learned mathematics and literature and, apparently, military tactics through interactive games. One report particularly troubled Colvin. Scout had observed a human military academy where young officers were being trained. The curriculum included case studies of historical battles, many of which involved humans fighting other humans with a level of brutality and sophistication that shocked even experienced Zalthari commanders. The humans had fought wars with chemical weapons, nuclear weapons, and biological agents. They had engaged in planetary sieges lasting years. They had developed tactics for fighting in every conceivable environment, from deep space to underwater to underground, and then they had stopped about a century ago, according to the historical records. Humanity had looked at its own capacity for destruction and collectively decided to redirect that energy toward exploration and development instead. They still maintained their military capabilities, but they used them primarily for defense and peacekeeping. The weapons that could destroy planets sat in secure storage, maintained but unused. The tactics that could devastate civilizations were taught as historical lessons, not active strategies. Colvin realized something that made his blood run cold. Humanity was not ignoring the Zalthari threat because they were naive or unprepared. They were ignoring it because they genuinely did not consider it dangerous. The Zalthari Empire, which had terrorized 17 star systems, was less concerning to humanity than trade disputes and budget meetings. 3 months had passed since the Zalthari Empire declared war on humanity, and Emperor Zalthar was forced to admit that the campaign had been a complete disaster. His forces had accomplished nothing except getting fined by human regulatory agencies and embarrassed by automated defense systems. The mighty Zalthari war machine, which had crushed dozens of civilizations, had been reduced to lurking at the edges of human space like unwanted visitors who did not know when to leave. The Emperor decided that direct intervention was necessary. He boarded his personal command ship, a vessel even larger and more impressive than the flagship that had carried the original declaration of war. With an escort of 30 warships, he traveled to the human solar system and demanded a meeting with Earth's leadership. This time, the message was marked as urgent and sent directly to every government office that handled interstellar relations. Admiral Crawford, who had been ignoring the Zalthari situation for 3 months while dealing with more important matters, finally decided that he should probably handle this personally. The Emperor of an alien empire was asking for a meeting, and it seemed rude to keep putting him off. Crawford agreed to meet at a neutral station near Mars, a diplomatic facility that humanity maintained for various interstellar negotiations. Emperor Zelthor arrived at the station with full imperial ceremony, wore his formal robes, carried the ancient symbols of his office, and brought an honor guard of 50 elite warriors in polished armor. The procession from his ship to the meeting room was designed to inspire awe and demonstrate the power and majesty of the Zalthari Empire. Every detail had been carefully planned to show that this was a ruler who commanded respect across the galaxy. Admiral Crawford showed up 20 minutes late wearing his regular duty uniform and carrying a coffee mug. He was accompanied only by his assistant, a young officer named Sophie Grant, who took notes on a tablet and occasionally checked her messages. Crawford apologized for being late and explained that his previous meeting had run over schedule because of a debate about equipment procurement procedures. They met in a small conference room with a table, some chairs, and a view of Mars through a large window. Zalthor took his position at one end of the table with his honor guard arranged behind him in formation. Crawford sat down across from him, set his coffee on the table, and waited patiently for the Emperor to begin. Zalthor had prepared a speech. He delivered it with all the passion and authority that 3 centuries of imperial rule had taught him. He spoke of the Zalthari Empire's long history, their countless victories, their dominance over 17 star systems. He described the power of their fleets, the loyalty of their subjects, and the inevitability of their conquest. He explained that 43 species had fallen before them, and that humanity would be the 44th. He offered terms of surrender that he described as generous, promising that humanity would be allowed to maintain some autonomy in exchange for tribute and obedience. Crawford listened to the entire speech without interrupting. He sipped his coffee occasionally and nodded at appropriate moments. When Zalthor finished, Crawford set down his mug and cleared his throat. "That was very impressive," Crawford said. "I can tell you put a lot of thought into it. Here's our situation, though. We've been in space for about 200 years now. In that time, we've had 3 civil wars among our own colonies, 2 separate alien invasions before you guys showed up, and we accidentally created an artificial intelligence that tried to take over our computer networks. We had to negotiate with it for 6 months before we could get it to stop. We also accidentally created a black hole during a physics experiment once. That was a bad week." Zalthor stared at him. Crawford continued, "I'm not trying to be dismissive of your empire or anything. I'm sure you've accomplished a lot, and you've got every right to be proud. But we're genuinely too busy to add another war to our schedule right now. We've got colony ships that need building, trade agreements that need negotiating, and theirs. This whole situation with the Centauri Alliance that's taking up most of my time." Sophie pulled up some data on her tablet and turned it toward Zalthor. "We did do an analysis of your fleet and technology, though," she said. "It's all in here if you want to look at it." Zalthar looked at the tablet and saw detailed breakdowns of every Zalthari ship class, weapon system, and tactical doctrine. The analysis was thorough, accurate, and had clearly been completed weeks ago. Humanity had known exactly what they were facing from the very beginning. They had simply chosen not to care. How are you not afraid? Zelther asked, his voice barely above a whisper. We have conquered dozens of worlds. We are the terror of 17 star systems, Crawford shrugged. I've read the reports on your ships and weapons. No offense, but your technology is roughly where we were about 60 years ago. We stopped building weapons like yours because they were too expensive to maintain and not efficient enough for modern warfare. Your plasma cannons use about 3 times more energy than our equivalent systems, and your shields have a pretty obvious vulnerability to electromagnetic pulse weapons, which is why that mining station was able to disable your ships so easily. Sophie added some more information. We also noticed that your faster-than-light drives are pretty outdated. You're probably spending way too much on fuel costs. We've got some newer designs that might interest you if you want to discuss trade agreements instead of war. Zolther felt something he had never experienced in his long reign. He felt small. His mighty empire, which had terrified countless civilizations, was being politely informed that it was technologically obsolete. The humans were not impressed with his power because they had already surpassed it and moved on to bigger concerns. What do you consider an actual threat? Zolther asked quietly. Crawford thought for a moment. Well, there's a Gamara burst heading toward the Kepler colonies that we're worried about. We're trying to figure out how to evacuate about 50,000 people before it arrives. And our artificial intelligence research division keeps accidentally creating self-aware programs that we have to have ethical discussions with. That's always complicated. Oh, and there's apparently a religious war brewing in the Andromeda trade routes that might disrupt shipping. That one could get messy. So you face existential threats regularly. I wouldn't say regularly, Crawford said. Maybe a few times a year. We're pretty good at handling them by now. You learn to adapt. Zolther sat in silence for a long moment. His honor guard stood motionless behind him, their weapons ornamental and useless. His great empire, built over 3 centuries of conquest, had been reduced to an inconvenience. Finally, he asked the question that had been growing in his mind. Would you be willing to establish a trade agreement instead of continuing this war? Crawford smiled. Absolutely. That's actually what we were hoping would happen eventually. Sophie can set you up with our trade commission. They'll walk you through the process. Sophie pulled up the relevant forms on her tablet. You'll need to fill out some applications and go through the standard approval process. It usually takes about 6 weeks. We can fast-track it a bit, since you're an empire and all. The meeting ended with handshakes and the promise of future cooperation. Zolthar left the station feeling hollow, but also strangely relieved. The war was over, not because one side had defeated the other, because both sides had agreed it was pointless to continue. The Zalthari Empire would become a trading partner with humanity, a minor footnote in the vast network of interstellar commerce. Back on Earth, the news of the war's end barely made the headlines. The story ran on page 12, right after an article about a new restaurant opening in New York and before a piece about advances in fusion reactor technology. The headline read, Alien War Ends, Replaced with Trade Deal. Most people who read it felt vaguely relieved that the war thing had been resolved. Though many had forgotten it was happening in the first place, Admiral Crawford returned to his normal work, which currently involved reviewing proposals for a new generation of colony, ships, and trying to resolve a labor dispute at the Mars shipyards. The Zalthari situation was filed away and forgotten. Just another item on the long list of things that humanity had dealt with and moved past. Humanity went back to its daily concerns, building and exploring and arguing about budgets and regulations. The galaxy had learned an important lesson about declaring war on a species that had bigger problems to worry about. The Zalthari Empire quietly integrated into the interstellar community, and within a year, most humans would have trouble remembering that there had ever been a war at all.